Imagine this scene. A young man in a silk dress stands next to the emperor himself. His body is powdered, his face is like a mask. And this is not a theater performance. This is a real wedding, consecrated by priests in the laws of Rome. Torches burn in marble stands, casting long shadows on the walls of the Golden House. The dome above their heads is decorated with a starry sky made of gold and ivory. The floor shines with polished stone, and the air is heavy with the smell of incense and rose oil. This is not a temple. It is a stage built for one actor. In the center of the hall stands Emperor Nero. He wears a laurel wreath and a purple robe, his face accustomed to the gaze of thousands. His eyes shine not with love, but with triumph. Next to him is a young man, a slave. His thin shoulders tremble under the weight of a silk dress, his face so carefully powdered that it resembles a mask. His voice breaks because he is too young to be a man, let alone the emperor's man. Today he is playing the role of a bride. His name is Spor, but everyone understands that he is not the one in charge here. He is merely a ghost of another, the one whose place he occupies. The imperial wife Poppaea Sabina, whom Nero recently killed with a kick while she was carrying his child. The crowd of courtiers froze. Some looked away, some pressed their lips together to suppress laughter. In this hall, it was dangerous to even breathe your opinion, because today's wedding was not a celebration, but a show, where the emperor played the leading role and the body of a young slave became a prop. Now think about it. What did all those senators, priests, and courtiers feel when they saw Nero and the boy kiss? They knew it was absurd, but they also knew that no one dared to object. When the high priest raises his hands to bless the union, only the crackling of torches can be heard in the hall. Nero bows his head, his lips touching the boy's, and at that moment, everyone understands. For Rome, the very concept of marriage has just been rewritten. This is not a wedding with love and tender vows. This is first-century Rome, a world where the will of one man had the force of law, and anyone's body could become a plaything. Slaves in this system did not belong to themselves. Their fate, their bodies, and even their names were the property of their masters. A slave could be punished or rewarded, sold or given away, used for work or entertainment. He was a thing, a living object. In 61 AD, about 400 slaves were executed in Rome simply because one of them killed his master. The rest, children, women, and the elderly, were crucified as a warning to others. For the Romans, this was not a crime, but the way things were. A slave was not a human being, but a thing. And if one thing broke or rebelled, all the others were punished. We already told this story in our previous video. If you haven't seen it yet, be sure to check it out, because even by the standards of Roman cruelty, this is a shocking case. But when the emperor himself was the master, this dependence became absolute. Just think about it. The capital of an empire, soldiers in every corner, crowds of subjects praising the ruler, and senators bowing so low that they are ready to rub their knees raw. In such a world, even the most absurd whim of Caesar became a mandatory ritual. Nero's marriage to Spora was not an exception, but a logical consequence of a system in which there were no boundaries between public and private life. In Rome, the intimate was always public. Weddings became spectacles, the bed became politics, and the body became an arena for demonstrating power. And that is why none of those who stood in the Golden House during the ceremony could object. Everyone understood that what they were witnessing was not a love story, but a performance in which Nero himself was both the main spectator and the director. And now back to the main participant in this scene. Sporus. Who was he? Sources say little, just one word: service slave. A young man who found himself close to the emperor. We do not know his origins. We do not know from which province he came to Rome, or if he ever had a family. History has erased everything except his name. But we know something else. He resembled Poppaea Sabina, Nero's wife. Poppaea, known for her beauty, capriciousness, and for becoming the emperor's second wife. Poppaea, whom he killed during a quarrel when she was pregnant with his child. One kick, and Rome lost its empress, and Nero lost the woman he was obsessed with. After the death of Poppaea Sabina, whom he killed with his own hands, Nero ordered her body to be embalmed and an almost divine cult to be established in her honor. This explains why Spore was such an obsession for him. He was the living double of the dead empress, a replacement created by his own hands, a living ghost, a reminder of his loss. He couldn't let her go, and so he ordered that another be made, a copy. The slave was castrated. His body was altered to resemble his dead wife. He was taught to wear women's dresses, paint his face, and move gracefully. The emperor created a living portrait of the deceased Poppaea, a shadow in the flesh. In Rome, the castration of slaves was a barbaric and deadly procedure. It was performed without real anesthesia. At most, opium or wine. Primitive bronze instruments were used. Infections killed up to half of the boys. Often the operation ended in massive bleeding, and the slave died on the spot. Those who survived carried the scars for the rest of their lives. Voice changes, bone problems, and the inability to have children. There was a whole shadow trade in eunuchs in Rome. Boys were castrated as children to make them suitable for the whims of the palace. Many died from infection or blood loss, but those who survived became commodities. Their owners bought them not as people, but as special toys. For some it meant singing or dancing. For others it meant serving in the most intimate roles. Spore was no exception. He became part of this cruel practice simply because his body seemed convenient to the emperor for a new role. Try to imagine what that meant for this boy. Waking up every morning and realizing that you no longer belong to yourself. Your body has been turned into a prop for someone else's passion. You were chosen not because of your will or your desires, but only because you reminded the emperor of the one he had killed. Sporus' name remains in history not as the name of a person, but as a symbol of how far imperial whims could go when a slave's body became a substitute for a dead one. To understand Sporus' story, you have to look at the person who made him her bride, at Nero himself. He was born into a dynasty where blood meant power. His mother, Agrippina the Younger, was an extremely ambitious woman. She did everything to make her son emperor. To this end, she married Claudius, the previous ruler of Rome. She forced him to adopt Nero, even though Claudius already had an heir. In 54 AD, when Claudius died suddenly, allegedly after eating a plate of poisoned mushrooms, the 17-year-old Nero ascended the throne. The people welcomed him with enthusiasm. He was young, handsome, eloquent, and loved the arts. Everyone was waiting for a golden age, a new era of peace and prosperity. The first years of his reign only confirmed these hopes. The young emperor listened to his mentors, the philosophers Seneca and the prefect of the Praetorian Guard, Burrus. Taxes were lowered, justice was more lenient, and life seemed to become easier. The people adored him. The senators still hoped that under their guidance, he would grow into a wise ruler. But this image quickly crumbled. Another side of Nero's character began to emerge. Capriciousness, a thirst for luxury, impatience with any restrictions. He dreamed not of reforms, but of the stage. Not about laws, but about the fame of a singer and actor. And the power he had gained thanks to his mother gradually turned against her. Agrippina, who had so wanted to put her son on the throne, soon became a burden to him. She tried to rule the empire on his behalf, gave advice, demanded obedience. But Nero no longer wanted to be a puppet, and then he ordered his own mother to be killed. From that moment on, his reign changed forever. The young man who was seen as the new Augustus turned into a man for whom the entire empire became a theater. He no longer played the role of the perfect emperor. He himself decided what the performance would be. It is in this world, a world where life and death were mere decorations, that the story of Sporus begins. For Nero, a slave was not a person, but an image, a role that could be imposed on someone. The wedding of Nero and Sporus took place openly in front of the entire court. It was not a private event, but a demonstration of power. Priests blessed the union, senators and nobles stood as witnesses. No one dared to object. Protesting against this absurdity meant protesting against the emperor himself. Imagine, you are standing in the Golden House, you see a young man in a wedding dress next to Nero, and you know that this is madness. But a word of protest would cost you your life. In a world where all of life was turned into a spectacle, even intimacy became public. Slaves were forced to act out marriage scenes at banquets. Humiliation became entertainment for the guests. Nero especially loved it when the private became public and the body became a prop. At imperial banquets, slaves were forced to sing, dance, or even act out intimate scenes in front of guests. The courtiers pretended that this was normal, and Spore became a living toy, publicly humiliated. Nero did not hide him. On the contrary, he showed him off at banquets and addressed him as his wife. The young man in silk robes sat among senators and generals as if he were their equal. To everyone, he was the shadow of Poppaea, a living mask on someone else's face. He was taught how to sit, walk, and hold his hands. Makeup artists applied paint every day. His hair was styled with hot tongs, and his voice was made to sound thinner and higher. It was a daily theater in which he had to portray a woman in even the smallest gestures. Slaves at court were not only forced to work, they were selected for their beauty, adorned, dressed in fine fabrics, and displayed as living decorations. Their bodies became part of the spectacle, singing, dancing, and intimate roles. It was a demonstration of the power of the master, who could turn a person into a prop. The courtiers whispered that the emperor was going mad, but the more they talked, the louder Nero demonstrated his marriage. He showed that he could do anything, and they would accept it, even if his wife was a castrated slave in women's clothing. And that wasn't his only performance. Almost at the same time, Nero arranged another wedding. This time he himself became the bride of his freedman Pythagoras. He allowed himself to be covered with a veil and played the female role in the ceremony. It was another challenge to Rome, another demonstration of power. It is said that he dreamed of making even his own horse a consul. Joke or truth, but the senators had no doubt. If he wanted to, he would have done it. Thus the emperor played with life as if it were a stage. Today he was a man with a slave wife. Tomorrow he was the bride of his former slave. All of Rome had turned into a theater, and Sporus was just one of the most terrible roles in this spectacle. What happened to Sporus was no exception during Nero's reign. It is just one of dozens of episodes that show how the emperor blurred the lines between power, the stage, and life. The Great Fire of Rome and the persecution of Christians. In July 64, Rome was engulfed in flames. Half of the city burned to the ground. People suspected that Nero himself had ordered the neighborhoods to be set on fire to make way for his new palace. Although he tried to help the victims, the anger did not subside. Then the emperor found the culprits, the first Christians. They were impaled on stakes and set on fire, turning them into living torches in his gardens. These were spectacles that horrified even the blood-hardened Romans. The Golden House. After the fire, Nero began to build a palace the likes of which Rome had never seen before. The Golden House stretched over hundreds of acres, gardens with lakes, fountains, waterfalls, ceilings that rotated like a wheel, showering guests with flowers and fragrances. In the center was a colossal statue of Nero, so large that it seemed as if the god himself had entered the city. It was not a palace, it was a monument to himself. Anger against the Senate. The senators hated him but feared him even more. He forced them to sit in the theater for hours, listening to his singing and poetry. No one dared to applaud too quietly or too loudly, because any little thing could be a reason for execution. There are stories of how some pretended to faint or even die to avoid the next concert. A game with life. His entire reign was a series of such performances. For Nero, people, senators, slaves, and even his close associates were props in his personal theater. Some became victims, some became the audience, but no one remained on the sidelines. Controversy was only the most striking symbol of this world, where the body and soul of a person became the property of a single actor who called himself emperor. Nero's end came suddenly and disgracefully. In 68 AD, legions rebelled in the provinces, and the Senate declared him an enemy of the state. In the city where he had staged spectacles only yesterday, there was not a single defender left today. Even his own guard scattered. When he realized that all was lost, he sought solace in those he still considered loyal. But they too abandoned him. He spent his last hours in a villa outside the city, in a panic, repeating, "What an artist dies with me," as if it were not death but his final scene. He did not dare to raise his hand himself, so he ordered a slave to help him. Thus, Emperor Nero passed away, and Rome breathed a sigh of relief. But what happened to Sporus? Here the silence begins. The sources that so diligently describe the emperor's madness suddenly fall silent. Was he killed immediately after Nero's fall, as a reminder of his shame? Or did he disappear into the crowd, trying to hide his name and past? Did he live on, like a shadow that no one wanted to see anymore? Every morning he saw a face in the mirror that was not his. He was given the name Poppaea, and he had to respond to a name that was not his own. He was forced to wear jewelry and dresses that belonged to the real Poppaea. It became a constant erasure of his identity. We don't know, and we probably never will. History has left Spore as nothing more than a figure alongside Nero. Not a person, but a body turned into a symbol. His name survived not because of his own actions, but because he became a mirror of someone else's passion and madness. He remained in history not as a slave, not as a personality, but as Nero's bride. The story of Sporus is not just a strange episode in the life of an emperor. It is a mirror of a whole world where the body did not belong to itself, where a slave was property and the emperor was the master not only of life, but also of a person's very identity. In first-century Rome, even the most intimate aspects of life became political. Marriage, love, personal relationships, everything was turned into a spectacle for the masses. In such a system, the pain of slavery and human dignity disappeared under the weight of the emperor's whims. Sporus went down in history not as a hero or a personality, but as a symbol of how absolute power blurs the lines between private and public, between stage and life. A symbol of how, in a world where one person owns everything, even a stranger's soul becomes a prop in someone else's show. His name is almost accidental, but it carries the memory of how far power can go when there are no limits. Now think about it. How far is this story from our time? Don't we see today how bodies, freedom, and even love are once again becoming tools of someone else's power? That is why this story sounds so terrifying today. Because Spore is not just Nero's slave. He is all those whose lives have been turned into a spectacle of someone else's control.